Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. Usually on this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We've covered 6 seasons of subgenres so far on this podcast, a series on slashers, a series on ghost stories, on folk horror, on zombie movies, on occult movies, and on psychological and body horror. We're currently in a little hiatus between seasons, but we'll be back very soon for Series 7, exploring alien, sci-fi, and cosmic horror. But this week we're bringing you a little bonus episode because, of course, this weekend sees the release of a new Saw movie, none other than Spiral, starring Chris Rock and directed by Darren Lynn Bousman. It also coincides nicely with a lot of cinemas reopening here in the UK, so I know for a lot of you out there listening, Spiral is going to be your first trip back to a cinema or a movie theatre in over a year, which is, again, really exciting. So we wanted to take this opportunity to cover the movie and share our thoughts on Spiral. Now, over on Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror, we've actually been working our way through all of the Saw movies in order. So me and my co-host Rob Watts watched all of the Saw movies from parts 1 through to part 8. That's Jigsaw from 2017, and you can hear all of our thoughts on all of those Saw movies if you're a $10 patron. You'll get access to that entire mini-season. So we were primed and ready to watch Spiral this week. So later on in this episode, you are going to hear our thoughts. Me and Rob Watts and special guest Louise Blain discussed what we made of Spiral. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you can also hear the extended chat where we also go into spoilerific details. But the spoiler-free half of the discussion is available on this episode. But first of all, we've got a couple of exciting little interviews to play you guys. I was lucky enough to get to sit down with 2 of the key people involved with Spiral. Later on in this episode, you're going to hear my chat with the director, Darren Lynn Bousman. Of course, Darren not only directed Spiral, but he directed 3 of the original Saw movies as well. So he and that franchise go way back. But first of all, very excitingly, this is somebody I never expected to introduce on the podcast. I got to sit down and chat to the one and only Chris Rock, the star and executive producer of Spiral. I was only given 5 or 10 minutes with him, but we had a little chat about his relationship with the horror genre and the Saw series, and I even got to give him a little quiz on the Saw traps, which was a lot of fun. So please enjoy my spoiler-free chat with the one and only Chris Rock. Okay, I am very excited to be joined by none other than the star of Spiral and the executive producer, Chris Rock. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Mike.
Hello. Hi, Chris. Tell me, this is quite surreal. I never in a million years, I think, expected somebody like you, Chris Rock, a comedian, superstar, to be on this horror podcast talking about a horror movie. It's quite unusual for you to dip into the horror genre, but are you a fan of horror movies? Have you always been?
Yeah, I've definitely been a big fan of horror movies, you know? They're, especially in a theater, you know? I just like when you're in a theater, there's something about being scared with strangers that's really exciting, man, that you don't get in just a normal drama, even a comedy. It's just something about that audience when you're in a theater watching a horror movie that you are one.
Something I've spoken to about a couple of people in the past, actually, is that link between comedy and horror. And that even though they're so different, right, there is something that they share in common, whether it's timing, pacing, whether it's their reputation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you can't tip it. You know what I mean? Like either one. It is all about how relaxed can I get. The more relaxed I get people, the more everybody thinks that what's happening is real, the better the joke's going to work. And the same thing with a scare. They really are two. We're both trying to get reactions, just a different reaction.
So tell us a little bit about Spiral then. How did this movie happen? And tell us a bit about your involvement in it.
I mean, I was always a fan of the Saw movies, and I watched most of them, and now I've watched them all, but I remember watching like 2 or 3, I forget which one, and I was like, and I do this with a lot of movies. I was like, I wonder how this would be if this character was funny. You know what I mean? Like, I remember specifically with number 2, looking at the Donnie Wahlberg character and thinking he was great. But I was like, how would that be if this guy was funny? And I brought that up to one of the producers, and they kind of liked the idea. And here we are.
And how do you find that tonal balance of juggling, adding a bit of comedy to what is otherwise quite dark subject matter, right? And your character in particular, you really have to kind of juggle the darkness and the light, right?
I mean, comedy. Here's the thing. I think I function better in a dramatic world, just even as a comedian. Even my stand-up. My bread and butter is talking about topics that aren't funny. That's when I am at my funniest. When I am, speaking an uncomfortable truth. And as I gotten older, I realized as an actor, my comedy works better in a drama than I'm funnier in a Martin Scorsese movie than I am in a Will Ferrell movie. You know what I mean? Like, Sam Jackson's like that. And he's not even a comedian, but he's funny in everything he's in. You know what I mean? So he's funnier honestly in dramas than he is in comedies. Not that he's not funny in comedies. So I'm that kind of actor. And so that's where I need to be. And
do you enjoy doing the more serious stuff as well? The kind of dark, gritty acting that is required in this particular role as well?
Yeah, I do. I like, again, it's where I think I'm just better in that kind of world, in that dark world. So, yeah, I welcome it. I hope I get to do more.
And did you say you did you rewatch all 8 Saw films before?
I revisit them, yeah, especially for the traps, because I was like, maybe we can bring some of these traps back.
That's very cool. I've just rewatched them all as well. How did you find rewatching them back to back? Did you find it confusing in the latter movies? Because the plot gets kind of convoluted. It gets kind of crazy, right?
It gets crazy. Some are tighter than others. Yes.
Yes.
But all of them are entertaining. So,
and do you think? Would you recommend to people rewatching them all before coming to Spiral? I mean, like, how much is Spiral drawing on the original Saw movies, or could you come to Spiral as a complete newbie?
I don't think you have to have seen any of the Saws to enjoy this. And I think there's enough homages to the other ones for the people that have seen, all the other ones.
And do you reckon that there's going to be more? Is this the beginning of a new franchise, of a new series? I mean, obviously we won't spoil Spiral and what happens, but are we going to see more Spiral movies?
I hope so. I hope this is like a Creed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it, starts the thing over. Creed is technically Rocky 7, but it really starts the whole thing all over again. You know what I mean? Now we're following Michael B. Jordan and his journey. So hopefully this one starts it all over again, and we follow my journey.
And this movie does, this does juggle the themes of corrupt police officers, the way that they treat certain people in certain communities, right? Obviously, this movie was filmed before last year, before George Floyd, but I just wondered, how do you find that now in the context of this past year? Is there something added to this movie now?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, this, like you said, this movie was made before, what's happened the last year, before all the protests and George Floyd and everything. And it's kind of sad that the movie is so relevant in that aspect about corrupt police departments. But hopefully, I hope it leads to a discussion of what's really going on out there.
Yeah. Chris, we've got a couple of minutes left. What I wanted to do, I mean, you mentioned that you've rewatched all of the Saw movies. I want to see how well you remember them. Chris, I'm going to test your Saw knowledge briefly.
Oh, no.
Okay. I am going to describe a trap from one of the Saw movies. You have to tell me which Saw movie this trap is from, okay?
Okay.
Okay, number 1, The Needle Pit.
I think The Needle Pit The Needle Pit's one of the great ones. That's like number 3, I think. Is that 3?
So close. It was number 2, Saw 2.
Number 2.
Absolutely one of the best ones. One of the most gross traps of the whole series, I think. That's a big fan favorite.
The Needle Pit. Oh, God, that was so creepy.
Okay, number 2, the Shotgun Carousel. The Shotgun Carousel.
Now you're getting me.
I'm sorry, it's very hard.
I don't know. 4?
Good guess. It was 6. It was Saw 6. Definitely, again, one of the fan favorites. Okay, your next one. The Vat of Pig's Guts. The Vat of Pig's Guts.
I'm going to say 3.
Correct. Oh, my God. Okay, your next one. The Room Full of Razor Wire. The Room Full of Razor Wire.
Wait, is that 1?
Very good. It was indeed Saw 1, one of the very first traps we ever see in the Saw franchise. You're doing very well. You've got 2 out of 4 so far. Your last one, you mentioned this is one of your favorite traps, the reverse bear trap. Now, the reverse bear trap has appeared in 3 different Saw movies.
The reverse bear... Okay, I'm going to fail every time. I'm going to say 3.
No, good guess. You could have had Saw 1, Saw 6, or Saw 7, but they do all kind of bleed into one.
They become one if you watch them all.
You did very well. Thank you so much, Chris. My final question to you before we wrap up, which I like to ask everyone who comes on this podcast. What's your favorite horror movie?
My favorite ever horror movie is Let the Right One In.
Oh, wow. That is what a great choice. Beautiful film.
Oh, it's a beautiful film.
Yeah, really something. Excellent choice. Well, Chris Rock, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
A big thank you there to the amazing Chris Rock. How surreal. I loved it. So we're going to get to our thoughts on Spiral very shortly. But first of all, you're going to hear a bit of my discussion with the director of Spiral, Darren Lynn Bousman. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Darren goes way back when it comes to the Saw franchise. He directed Saw 2, Saw 3, and Saw 4. So actually one of the most kind of consistent voices and directors across the Saw series. I asked him a little bit about what it was like to return to that universe and direct Chris Rock in a brand new Saw movie. Please enjoy my spoiler-free discussion with Darren Lynn Bousman. A big hello to Darren Lynn Bousman. Hello, Darren.
How are you?
Really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. How does it feel to come back to the Saw franchise, something that you were such a big part of?
It felt unreal. I mean, I guess I've learned something in my career, and that's never say never, because when I left Saw 4, I said that was done. I'm never coming back. Because I felt like I'd done everything. Like I had killed people in a ton of different ways. I'd done all of that, but then they come to me and say, we have Chris Rock. I've never done that. And I was like, I'm back. So it was a very surreal experience.
So it was Chris, was it, that sort of tipped it for you?
100%. I mean, I think, as a filmmaker, you always want to jump at anyone that you're a fan of. And, I've been very lucky in my career to work with people that I'm truly fans of. And so, I remember growing up as a kid and listening to his comedy albums. And I'm an adult listening to his comedy albums and his specials. So I think that was just it was a no-brainer for me.
So obviously, the first movie was made by James Wan, Lee Whannell, but I feel like you particularly in taking on sort of 2, 3, and 4 really kind of gave the franchise the look and the vibe that we sort of we think of when we think of Saw, I suppose. There's a particular color palette, there's a particular style of editing. How much did you want to sort of carry that style through to this movie, or were you keen to sort of go in a new direction?
I think we had to go in a new direction. I mean, listen, there are familiar whiffs that you'll see Saw in this movie. But, for me, I think one of the most important things that I wanted to do, and this was the hardest thing for me as a filmmaker, is to sever things, such as John Kramer, such as Billy Doll. These are 2 things that are so iconic to the Saw universe that the moment that they take over this movie, that's all fans are going to think about. There's a new killer in this film. And one of my intentions is to go completely opposite of John Kramer as I could. because there's only one John Kramer. There is only one Tobin Bell. No one can compete with who Tobin Bell is as a character, as an actor. So we wanted it to be different. So the first thing we tried to do is to figure out what we're going to keep. What is the things that we're going to allow back into this? And to us, it was the traps, first and foremost. The Charlie Clouser music, which has become a staple of the Saw universe. And then I really fought hard to keep an iconic puppet. And I wanted it to be different than Billy, but I wanted it to look and feel like it came from the same family as Billy. So then I was able to sell them on this marionette pig puppet. So keeping those kind of iconic things, then we wanted to wipe everything else clean. We have a new cinematographer this time around, a young guy named Jordan Oram, who could not have been a cooler collaborator with me and gave the movie such a unique style. Gone are the rapid fire cutting every 1.5 seconds. Gone is the, handheld everything. We're Steadicam, we're on cranes, we're on dollies this time. So I think it looks a lot more polished, but it's got that grit and grime. Every shot looks hot and sweaty. I wanted, Jigsaw to me was not the movie as a Saw fan I wanted to see, in the way that it was so polished. It was so pretty. It was so, it was shiny. And that to me is not what Saw is. Saw is grimy and dirty. And so I wanted to take it back to that grimy and dirty, but I wanted it to feel different and unique. And I think that right off the bat, in that opening scene with Chris Rock where he's doing the Forrest Gump thing, you're in a different movie.
The original Saw movies, particularly the sequels, I suppose, are often now connected with the term torture porn that was very kind of big, particularly within that decade. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that term, torture porn, and your involvement in that subgenre, I suppose?
It's funny because Eli Roth is very vocal on it, and he gets upset when people use the word torture porn. I shrug it off, and I'm just like, if I agree with him on one thing, if they're using that as a term, if someone says another torture porn movie, they were never my fan to begin with, and they were never going to be a fan of what this thing was. I think it's an easy way for people to categorize something that either they're not fans of or they don't understand. If you watch, Hannibal, it's a TV show here in the States. It's more violent than any Saw movie. I mean, that guy's skinning people, he's eating people. I mean, it's much more violent. I think the difference on ours is that those scenes, the trap scenes, are the focal point of which people talk about after the movie ends. They talk about, oh my God, she fell in a pit of needles. Oh my God, his body twisted and contorted apart. But they have messages. We're not just killing for the sake of killing. And I think that, there's been a lot of copycats in the Saw universe. What separates them and us, I think, is there's reason behind the madness. There's reasons these events are happening, why these people are put in the traps that they're put in. Example, why Boz is put in a trap to remove his tongue. He's not just doing it for the sake of violence. There's a reason behind it. You lied under oath. You used your mouth to spread disinformation. You ruined people's lives by your tongue talking out of turn. Now, to correct that, let's remove the thing that's caused so many others so much pain. And so I think that those, they're more than what a lot of people see. And so those that call it torture porn, I just, I shrug it off and I'm like, you just don't get it. There's a lot more violent films out there than the Saw movies. I'll tell you that.
There certainly are. Actually, one of the things that I love about the Saw movies is that, like you say, it's not just the gore, it's also the story. Like the story, particularly in some of the sort of the sequels, when you get to parts 3 and 4, it becomes so complex, doesn't it? And I just wondered, how was that for you at the time, juggling the different timelines, the chronologies, the various different accomplices, and all of the way in which those different plot strands and characters weave together, and particularly across those sort of first 4 films?
It got so goddamn complicated that it hurt my head. And you know what's even more complicated than that is how much the fans are into the minutia. And I think, it was hard. And like, I remember I went to a convention once and I was on a Saw panel with Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith, and a fan raised their hand to ask a question about Saw 3. And I answered this question as eloquently as I could. And the fan called me out on everything I got wrong. And I was like, oh my God, like, So they became infinitely complex, but that's also why I love them. In the way that you felt like you're part of this weird dysfunctional family, because if you had seen the previous 8 Saw films, you knew, and there was a breed of moviegoers that would go see a movie every Halloween when it came out, and they knew all the connections between Hoffman and Jill Tuck and Jigsaw's lawyer and Jigsaw's gardener's brother's uncle's name, like they knew it all. Part of what we wanted to do this time is wipe the slate clean and basically say we're ushering in a new story in the Saw franchise that does not require you to know all of that. Now, that said, just because Spiral exists does not mean Saw 1 through 8 is done. This is the 9th installment of the Saw franchise, but it's not Saw 9. Saw 9 could still exist. There might be a 9th version that continues on the John Kramer Logan storyline that continues on where Jigsaw left off. This is a new chapter for those people that have never seen a Saw film and want something, that they haven't seen, or from the fans of the past 8 Saw films that want to see a different approach to the universe.
Did you know when you were making, for example, Saw 2, that you were going to be doing a Saw 3, and then but I always wonder with those movies how much is planted and planned for the sequels, or how much you kind of had to retroactively, I suppose, weave in,
Well, by the time we did Saw 3, we knew what was happening. We did not on Saw 2. But by the time we did Saw 3, we would plant seeds that we had no intention of paying off in Saw 3. Or in Saw 4, we planted things that we knew that if it made 2 more sequels, we were going to answer those questions. And I think that's a really smart way to approach a franchise, is that you basically seed things through much earlier with no intention of paying them off. So when you do pay them off 2 films down the line, you can go back and be like, oh shit, they talked about that in that whatever film. So, I will tell you that things like that did happen in Spiral, where we consciously said, we're not going to answer all the questions. We're not going to put everything out there in hopes that if fans enjoy the film, knock on wood, and we're back next year making another one, we will pay things off.
That's very cool. So is the plan, I suppose it's hard to say at this point, but is the plan for there to be a new potential series of films in the Spiral universe?
It's a possibility. I think that what is exciting about the Saw franchise is that we've all kind of realized with working with Chris Rock is there is not a singular sequel necessarily, but there could be multiple sequels to multiple different storylines. Recently it was announced that Lionsgate is working on a TV series of the Saw universe. We have, Tobin Bell still very much, a possibility out there. We have now Spiral. So I think the idea is if this is successful and fans embrace it, we will continue on making multiple different IPs out of the Saw universe. I want to be the Marvel. I want to be like Marvel with the Saw universe. We're going to have 50 superhero things before the end of it. It's just 50 different serial killers out there killing.
Do you know what? It's very possible, isn't it? The franchise is so huge. Over here, we've got theme park rides and all sorts, right? Can
I tell you a sad story about Thorpe Park? I actually got to go. I actually got to go to Thorpe Park the week that the Saw ride opened, and they had this big press day for me, and I got to go there, and I took my picture, and I got on the roller coaster, and it broke, and I never got to see it, and I had to leave the next day. So after the entire thing, I never got to ride the Saw ride.
Oh, no. Well, it's awesome. Let me tell you, it's awesome.
I'm so sad.
That is really sad. You'll have to give it a go at some point. But yeah, it's wonderful. What is it about that little story that started with 2 guys in a bathroom? What is it about that has chimed with audiences across all these years, do you think?
To me, what it was when James Wan and Lee made that, they kind of broke so many different molds. First off, they made a movie for no money. It did not have some $50 million, $20 million budget. It had no budget. And I think that it showed that you can tell a compelling story in a very confined space with very few actors and make a huge impact. And it was smart. And it was brutal, not necessarily in the violence, just the storyline. It was a gut punch. At the very end, it was a gut punch. And right now I'm actually literally playing with cards right now in my hands because I love magic. And Saw 1 was a magic trick for the audience. They watched a movie and did not realize that they were going to be fooled. And then when that happened and John Kramer stands off the floor, it was like the same feeling you get when you see a magic trick. How the fuck? What? A what? And immediately you want to go back and rewatch it to see if you can find the clues that would have been the tells. And that kind of became the mandate moving forward is let's do a magic trick on the audience. And then let's package it with really inventive kills and a message, and John Kramer had a very intense, relatable message. And I think that resonated with fans.
Horror has changed, right, since these movies. I mean, now when you look at some of the big mainstream American horror films of the last few years, whether it's Get Out or Hereditary or, the films by Mike Flanagan and people like that, were you sort of aware of that while you were making this? Sort of like, were you cautious about, has horror moved on, I suppose, from the Saw movies?
I mean, you always wonder that. I mean, listen, Ari Aster, Mike Flanagan, Robert Eggers, these filmmakers are my favorite guys out there working right now. But I don't think you could make a Hereditary Midsommar approach to a Saw movie. Those are they like to call them elevated horror. I don't believe in the term elevated horror. I just think they're good movies. And people are so upset and they don't want to say that they watched a horror movie, so they call it elevated horror. They're just really good movies. I don't think that approach would work on this franchise because I think this franchise is commercial in the way that Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and these movies are. And I don't know if you could take that slow build, because my favorite movies are the slow burn and then the punch in the gut at the very end. I think these are in between of a popcorn movie and a grindhouse kind of thing, where you have the excitement of the traps, but you also have a social message in them as well. So it's a balancing act to make sure that you deliver to the mainstream fans, but you still are holding true to your horror roots.
Darren, thank you. My final question for you, which I ask everyone, what's your favorite horror movie of all time?
Oof, it changes every day. I mean, literally on a daily basis. I'll tell you the one that unnerved me. It takes a lot to really like fuck with me. And I'm not gonna go Serbian film or something like that. But the one that really screwed me up recently was something called The House That Jack Built, which is I believe, and I might be completely wrong, it's a Lars von Trier movie.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. Because it is so batshit crazy in the third act. Like you think you're watching one movie and then it turns into something else. And you're like, wait, is this guy in hell? Did he just meet I mean, It is, I loved that one because first off, the violence was shocking in it. And then it just completely took a turn that I wasn't expecting. I loved the remake of Suspiria because I love the original Suspiria and this was its own thing. And again, it went places that I was not expecting it to go. And the visuals of some of those scenes in Suspiria. When I saw Hereditary the first time, I actually saw it with the director, not knowing I was sitting next to him. I saw it in a film festival. In fact, I was premiering St. Agatha, another one of my movies, and I left St. Agatha. And I was supposed to be back in like the very end to do a Q&A. And I got so wrapped up in Hereditary, I missed my own Q&A. And I was sitting next to the director, not knowing it was him. And the scene happened, and I'm a father. And the scene happened with the girl putting her head outside. And I screamed at the top. I was like, oh, goddamn. And then I saw him look over and get all happy. That was another great one. But it changes daily.
I love it. Fantastic answers. Darren Lynn Bousman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And there we go. A big thank you to the director of Spiral, Darren Lynn Bousman. Right, it's time to discuss our thoughts. Was this film actually any good? Here to discuss that with me, I've got two guests. First of all, let me introduce my regular Saw miniseries co-host. It's Rob Watts. Hello.
Hello, Mike.
Hello. Here we are, finally, about to discuss this film we've been waiting for a long time. And joining us for this discussion, she's back. It's Louise Blain. Hello.
Hello, both. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, thank you for being here, because you were here discussing 2 and 3 with us, right? So we've previously discussed Darren Lynn Bousman and his Saw movies. Me and Rob have then gone on and we've watched all the rest of them. Louise, have you rewatched the rest of the series as well?
I have. I couldn't help it. It becomes kind of this weird disease, or kind of like a scab that you can't stop pickings. You're like, yeah, I'll just watch all the rest of the Saws. I was like, this is fine. You've enabled this horrible thing. And I kind of loved going through them. It was fun to even have an excuse.
Totally. And what did you think of the rest, just briefly? Because I'd love to hear your thoughts, 4 onwards. What did you think of them all?
So I'm going to do a quick plug that because I watched them all, I then pitched a feature on the best Saw movies. So then I officially ranked them. And I got the best surprise when I watched Saw 6. Saw 6 is brilliant. Saw 6 is one of my favourite Saw movies. And no one should ever be able to say that the 6th in a franchise is their favourite, but it's totally up there for me. And with the highest body count of 14, you've got a murderous merry-go-round, so to speak, of horrible insurers. Good. So good.
Yeah, Saw 6 is like a revelation. 5 and 6, in a way, were both like, I was like, wow, after the dirgy part 4, I was like, this is incredible. And I didn't really realise until recently, but a lot of Saw fans, I think, do consider 6 the best, don't they? Sort of the high point. That's interesting. So we were all up to speed, like we'd all rewatched all 8 films before coming to this one, right?
Yeah.
I was so excited, though. That's the problem. I was all hyped up. I was all cranked up like a machine on a reverse bear trap, all ready just to spring, and then sprung. So let's get into it. We'll do a very brief spoiler-free chat first of all, so anyone can listen to this first half of the discussion. Louise, do you fancy doing the honours and giving us a brief spoiler-free sort of quick synopsis of what Spiral is about? Yes. So Spiral is not a reboot or a remake. It is a follow-up to the original series. As I don't even actually know when it's set time-wise. It doesn't seem terribly timey. It's got computers and USBs, but in it, a cop discovers that someone is replicating Jigsaw's activities from previously on in a really quite boring, quite uninventive, quite uninspiring way, and he needs to solve it.
Indeed.
And that's it.
Indeed. That's all we'll reveal for now.
I'm enjoying your face here, Rob. This is good.
Rob, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to you first. We were both quite excited about this, having rewatched all of them. What did you think of Spiral? Did it live up to your expectations?
It did not. I'm so sorry to say. Like as Louise said, like towards the end of the original series, I was like, wow, it's getting good, it's getting great. The final one was a letdown, but Jigsaw sort of picked it up again, and we're like, okay, it's got a lot of flaws, but it's kind of fun to see this stuff happening again. And then it's this film, Spiral, it's not really a Saw film. It sort of takes the bits that we didn't really love in any of the Saw films and uses that for most of the story, and then does away with what people came to Saw films for.
Tobin Bell.
Yep, we see a picture of him, don't we? I think. Is that a spoiler?
Just touched my screen. I was like,
Yes.
please come back. Please come back.
And I don't think it's a spoiler to say, and at this point in the episode, people have already listened to Darren Lynn Bousman say that, you know, this film, we get no Billy the Puppet, we get no John Kramer, it is a new killer with a new MO kind of thing. So, Louise, what about you? What did you think of Spiral?
Those exact omissions are the most colossal missteps for this sequel. So when you boil it absolutely down of what we watched Saw for, we watched Saw for horrible traps, but at the same time, inventive things that suddenly when someone woke up in a horrible place and they would see that puppet and they would hear that voice. And the removal of both of those things without anything to replace them, without anything scary or terrifying or interesting or intriguing, there's nothing there. It's like someone doing an impression of a Saw movie. I mean, why? I just don't understand why bother making this film and going, yeah, but we're going to change these things. It's like, no, that is literally why people flock to the cinema. Yes, in less numbers, every Halloween throughout the noughties. Yeah. Because they wanted to hear, do you want to play a game? And at no point do you have any of that intrigue or, I'm watching a Saw movie. Nothing, that just doesn't happen. And the rest of it isn't good enough to offset that. And that's just colossally disappointing. I just don't understand why you make a film about a grumpy cop again and again.
That's it. That's exactly it. And we were saying last time, Mike, we had all these ideas of what this could be. And they've literally gone with, you know, the most basic, tenuous connection to the original series.
Yeah, it loops us all the way back to what we said about the first Saw film that I think people almost forget, was that they were going for a very kind of grisly cop thriller, right? And then Saw kind of became something else, I think, but they've really doubled down on it for this one. They've tried to make it a sort of, Seven-esque, again, right? Procedural thriller. But the problem is Seven is incredibly well written, incredibly well directed, with some amazing performances, and this film just doesn't have any of those things, does it?
There is literally a point in this movie, talking about being well written, there is a point where a bundle of grumpy, toxic, machismo cops stand in the middle of a brown room shelling, screaming, "Fuck you! No, fuck you!" at each other. And that's it for 5 minutes. It's like this 13-year-old me could have come up with a better Saw movie than this.
I agree. What a colossal waste of time.
So what are your ideas for how this would have worked? So your one favourite thing for Saw, what was your concept, your ideal concept for this Saw? What would it have been? Because I have mine and I want to share it and then patent it.
Oh my God, please share yours, because I haven't got a good one. Go on.
So I think it should have been one of those content creator houses for Instagram of influencers in the Hollywood Hills. And I think either individually or all in this house, the traps should have been streamed. And actually, everyone had been like, oh, content creators are idiots or influencers are idiots. But actually, we'd be shown that they're really, really cool and good, but they're just making the most of things and doing this with their career. So actually, killing them in front of us is just this skewering of capitalism. And I would have been well up for that. Done.
Oh my
nice.
God.
So you're thinking much more about what the point of the film is.
Yeah, and just do it now.
Point.
And that's why Saw 6 worked so well, because it was about the American healthcare system. And you could easily find that guy someone to boo and hiss about. So that's what we need. We need a modern twist.
I think this is the thing that me and Rob were saying after we talked about Jigsaw. We kind of made our final predictions of what we thought Spiral would be. And I think both of us thought, Rob, didn't we? Even though obviously this was made pre-George Floyd and that kind of thing, we were like, surely this is in some way going to be maybe about the police, about corrupt police, about race, possibly. This is the first time we've got an African-American lead in this very cop-centric story. There was a lot of scope, I thought, for some really interesting ideas, and this film is just not interested in any of that stuff, is it? I don't think.
Literally every early 90s detective film, but written really badly.
Yes.
And do detective police departments look like that?
That's my
anymore?
question. I think I was texting Mike going, why is this room so brown? Do they look like this?
I think you're right, Rob, with what you said about how they kind of took what we didn't necessarily want from the series and they dropped the stuff that we did want. Like, I think the stuff that we've talked about in this recap that we've disliked the most, part of that is probably the look and the editing. Partly is also the kind of bland male white cops that all kind of look and sound the same, that all kind of yell at each other aggressively and have no range other than that, right? And that's all this movie is. There's no suspense. There's not like what I wanted was a really good, intriguing plot, maybe a mystery, a good twist, some good characters, and some good, frightening, gross situations that we can really feel affected by and drawn in. It didn't really have any of that stuff. The traps we'll get to in a minute weren't that effective, I don't think. And like you said, we spend all of our time with cops yelling "fuck you" at each other really loudly in brown rooms, basically.
Yeah, I think the best looking part of the film for me was the very start. Like the first.
There's a scene in a carnival or something,
minutes.
Isn't there, at the beginning? Yeah, and it looks.
Yeah,
great.
the carnival and the train.
The blue lit train. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, it was well lit. It just looked beautiful. It almost made the gore seem a bit too sexy, but I thought, okay, this is better. But then it just sort of seemed to abandon that. Like, we've done the trailer shots, let's move on to what we think people want rather than what we think they want from the trailer.
So what did we think of Chris Rock? Obviously, like, big name, probably the biggest name they've ever had in this whole series, really, right? And the whole series, the whole of this film has kind of happened by the sounds of it because of Chris Rock, right? That he was a massive fan of the originals, that he wanted to star in his own Saw movie. He said he wanted to bring a bit of comedy to it as well. He thought that he said that the one thing he thought that the old Saw movies lacked was comedy. So he wanted to bring that kind of comedy balance with the horror. Louise, what did you think of Chris Rock in this?
Oh, I was like, don't come to me, don't come to me, don't come to me. I didn't like him at all. I thought he was the most unlikable, horrific character. I didn't find him particularly funny. I thought that the writing, especially initially, I didn't know if it was trying to be sort of hip and cool and trying to be commentary, but at the same time I also didn't think it was very good commentary when they're sort of chatting. It didn't.
Yeah, so we should say, so the film literally begins, and this isn't really a spoiler, but the first thing we see of Chris Rock, right, is that he's having a conversation with these other guys, and he's basically being like, these days you've got to be all woke, you can't really like the old movies that you used to like, or you can't make the jokes you used to make, and straight away it's kind of being like,
that's the problem, like, we're horror fans, and it turns out we don't have to be woke, but it turns out that for the last decade of horror movies, we've actually really evolved, and we've had some really interesting discussions. We've had very interesting plot lines, and it's not sacrificed fear or suspense. But we've always talked about, and on the podcast you talk about this a lot, Mike, and it's the fact that horror itself isn't afraid to tackle societal issues. You'll often find, ever since George A. Romero skewering capitalism with going to the zombie shopping mall, horror has tackled societal problems, and Get Out is obviously a prime example of a very skewering portrayal of 21st century America. This doesn't manage to do any of that, and I don't even think it wanted to. I think it just tossed in some weird scripting at the start, as if, yeah, we know what you're thinking, we know you don't want any of that shit, and it's just vaguely offensive because of how badly it misses the mark. Like, it's just, it's not funny, it's not smart.
It seems out of date, and it felt like it was written by people just desperately trying to appeal to a group of people who they don't know because they've been out of touch with them for the last decade.
Yeah, and I think there probably are a certain group of people. I mean, we know they are because they can be quite vocal online. There's a certain group of people that are kind of quite anti this kind of wave of more sort of social commentary horror maybe that we've had this last few years, right? And again, this is something I asked Darren Lynn Bousman about, that I said, horror has changed, and now we've got your Get Out, your Raw, your whatever else, Revenge, and all these other Midsummer, Hereditary, interesting movies. And he was like, we're not trying to be those movies. Like, we are catering to a more trashy, fun, like, that kind of, I guess, almost more B movie bracket, I suppose.
In which
and that's
case,
fine, but that means you've also got to be really fun.
You have to be smart. You've got to be really smart. If you want to do that, you've got to be knowing, and you've got to be smart. You've got to Piranha 3D it. You've got,
you've got to be just really entertaining, right?
Or a movie like, was it The Hunt? I loved The Hunt.
Yeah.
That dealt with issues in a really entertaining, interesting, funny way where I didn't look away from the screen the whole time because I was having so much fun with it.
Yeah. A bit like Ready or Not as well, right? Like those types of, fun
I kept getting bored of Saw. I kept looking at my phone. And it's just like, well, that's not the point. So,
No, I know. What about then, stripping away any kind of like commentary this movie did or didn't make or whatever else, what about just the traps and the horror of this movie then? Rob, how do you think that was pulled off?
I think the first trap is done quite well. You see just enough, and it's quite gruesome. From there on, you really don't get any kind of energy from the traps. They really lean into the puns to do with the message, which doesn't work at all. It's not meant to be cheesy, but it comes across as very, very cheesy. I just don't think you see enough of the traps or the gore for a Saw film at all. Some interesting ideas, but ultimately I think they're all a bit disappointing.
I agree with Rob in the fact that I liked that first trap. It has a bit of a physical response to it in a way that some of the other traps don't manage, or even some of the traps in the rest of the series. But I do think matters with the traps is I think they're all quite it sounds silly to say that not all Saw traps are vindicative, but I don't feel like the traps, after watching 8 Saw movies, would have been designed by Jigsaw. Remarkably he wasn't fair, but he gave a balance of things, and some of the traps don't have any of that balance, and they feel like some of the time maybe they were designed by Amanda, so they don't even hold that same risk-reward balance, as gross as it is. The first one does, but I don't think the rest of them really do, and especially one of them that I will talk about in spoiler territory, because one of them made me very cross. But yeah, I don't believe the traps had a fun nastiness to them. They just had a nastiness, which is strange to say.
Well, I think you're so right, Louise. Like, there needs to be a balance, doesn't there? The thing that that takes these movies away from the torture porn label was this idea that like you could potentially survive these things as well. Like that was the fun of them, and like, would you be able to do it? Would you be able to saw off your own leg, or would you be able to open that man's stomach to get a key to free yourself? Which we saw people actually survive the traps, didn't we? And I think that's important to the point of this film.
That's a very good point, which I hadn't even thought about, but it's so crucial.
Yeah, because otherwise, well, you are, I suppose you're going back to that more sort of slasher format of, okay, we're just watching people die in grisly ways. But again, you need the tension, you need the excitement if you're going to just do it that way, don't you?
I think the purest example of what Jigsaw's traps are is obviously the traps from the first one. But also, gosh, now I can't remember which number they put it into, but when Jigsaw, the guy that obviously murdered his unborn child, when he had him sitting in that chair and he made him push his face through the knives.
Yes.
That's the prime perfect example of what a jigsaw trap is. It's horrible, but if you put your mind to it and your face through it, you will get through it. And I think that's not there. That's gone. And I can't believe I'm saying that about a scuzzy murder movie. But that's the case, isn't it? We want jigsaw style stuff.
Yeah, that's 100% the point of it, isn't it, I think? I'll talk about something that I did like. Something that I thought was...
Let's do that.
Yes, do that.
There's something that I enjoyed was the Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson father-son dynamic. And maybe it was just because I quite like seeing Samuel L. Jackson in this film.
Well, talking of biggest movie stars.
Right.
He doesn't get much bigger than Sam Jackson.
Exactly. One of the biggest movie stars in the world. He has got a more of a supporting role in this film, but he's still quite significant in it, right? And not a spoiler to say he is Chris Rock's character's dad in this. And I did actually really enjoy watching those two kind of play off each other in the few scenes they had, right? Yeah. And Samuel L. Jackson is like, he's incapable of being bad. I think he's just he's so full of charisma, I think, you know?
Yeah, he brought atmosphere, and they actually felt like they had a relationship. So while I did not like Chris Rock's character in the slightest, having them spar and argue was fun.
Yeah, he has two of my favourite moments in this film, which I can't talk about yet, but he certainly brings it up a little bit when you see him.
He brings the gravitas that I suppose Tobin Bell maybe used to bring. That idea of like this kind of like slightly older, more experienced veteran actor kind of making an appearance in the film, you know, which was quite nice. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else we can say. I mean, Rob, what did you think of the general, you know, again, something that we've praised all the Saw movies for are the twists, the turns, the mysteries, the plot. This movie obviously is very much a whodunit, right? Because we know that it's not Jigsaw, he's dead. So you are left with this mystery of who is this killer in this film.
Yeah,
did you enjoy that? Did you work out who it was? Were you at all surprised? Again, we can talk about it more in spoilers, but...
Well, we mentioned that in the Jigsaw chat as well, where it was like, well, we know Jigsaw's dead. So, okay. And there was an element of, I wonder where they might take this. But by this point, you're like, okay, well, it's not John. So do we care about who it might be? And because everything is kind of happening to Chris Rock's character, Detective Banks, just wonder, and if you don't like him, whether you even want to find out who's doing all the stuff that he cares so much about. And I did not. And I mean, there's not much choice, but I definitely would have called it pretty early on, the killer.
I think we've already chatted about this, haven't we, Louise? But I think both of us called it at a very specific moment.
Yes, at a specific
probably
moment.
Only about a third of the way into the film.
Correct.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
It was like, it's deaf. Oh, okay, so that's how that... Okay.
Oh, I think I might know the moment.
To the point where I thought, surely they'll twist through this, so it's definitely not that. Oh, no, they're not being that smart. Okay.
Yeah, they're not. They're just not that smart.
Because
that's
such the thing.
A shame.
It does that twist stuff, and it does have some of the Saw music that you get excited by, but the twists just don't hit home in any way, do they?
No, I mean, the thing about the Saw movies, for better or worse, even the worst ones, always did have some kind of twist that took me by surprise, right?
They were genuinely
we talked about this over and over again.
They were so stupid they surprised you.
Yes.
That was it. It was so ludicrous. Oh, sure.
Yeah, this movie didn't have that.
I liked that, no spoilers here, but we've been talking about, or especially you, Mike, have been talking about Line of Duty and how Saw kind of is as complex as Line of Duty gets. And in this film, it kind of takes, this is Saw being Line of Duty, almost.
Because the last episode was really disappointing.
I mean, I would like to speak to the final episode. But yeah, the themes, that's what I mean.
Thematically.
100%. It's about bent coppers, right? This is a movie about bent coppers, essentially.
And Chris Rock is no Adrian Dunbar.
He's not. There's no Kate Fleming in this cast, is there?
Oh, no.
That's the problem.
There really isn't.
And like with Line of Duty, we don't know 100% at this point whether it actually is the last one. And we don't know yet.
Saw 10 is already in development.
Saw 10, right. And this is another thing. For people listening to this, they'd have already heard this. But Darren Lynn Bousman said to me, there's a strong possibility that Spiral movies could continue and Saw movies could continue at the same time. So they are not necessarily one and the same. So there may be a Saw 9 and a Spiral 2.
Right, okay. Just make Saw 9. Don't make Spiral.
Yeah.
Surely.
So this is
and forget...
Because there's also a Saw TV show that's coming out. So it's kind of going a little bit similar route to Chucky and Child's Play, because we now have Child's Play, the reboot, with Mark Hamill, and we're continuing Chucky and Tiffany on the small screen, and there's like two universes happening simultaneously. That may be happening with Spiral and Saw, but it's very confusing, because they are the same universe. So it's like, what? Yeah.
So they're just going to diverge.
But it sounds as though we probably are going to get more.
It feels like they already know that this isn't what people wanted. Yeah.
It's like, but that didn't happen. We'll just make another Saw, and we'll bring the right voice, and we'll have the right puppet, and it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, we should probably move into spoilers, but my final question, I think we'll probably know the answer to this, but would you recommend people go to I think potentially people will be able to go to the cinema. This might be some people's first cinema trip in over a year. Would you recommend they go see Spiral?
No.
No, don't do that. Don't return to cinemas with Spiral. Don't return to cinemas with something where I guarantee you will leave going, that was terrible. This is why I don't go to the cinema. Don't do that. No,
that would be...
See something
this is not
else.
that film. There's a lot coming out once we can go back. This is not the one to start on.
Yeah. A Quiet Place Part 2 is coming, right? Wait for that. That looks
Quiet
great.
Place Part 2. There's a lot of other hopefully good stuff to look forward to, but it's I was thinking I'm really looking forward to watching a good horror film in 2021, because it hasn't really happened yet. Oh, actually, Censor by Prano Bailey Bond is the one movie this year that I've loved. But a lot of the big properties, The Wrong Turns and The Spiral, like particularly the returning properties, have been not good so far.
There's a lot of returning.
It doesn't bode well for everything else that we're about to see. We're going to see another Hellraiser, a Candyman, a Scream, a Halloween. We've got all of those to look forward to in the next...
A Texas Chainsaw.
I mean, they're never very good, those
You mentioned a Halloween, though. At least that was okay as a film. I didn't love it.
It was okay.
I liked it.
Yeah, it was like perfectly fun and fine, wasn't it? Like it did what it needed to do for a fun modern Halloween movie, I thought. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of knew to be fun as well. I think this movie forgets to be fun, crucially.
Well, that's it. The comparisons of having a comedian involved with both end at the sentence, there's a comedian involved with both.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously Danny McBride was quite a massive Halloween fan and knew what kind of nods to put in and things like that. It feels like Chris Rock loved the films, but then was just like, I'd like to be in one.
Yeah.
But didn't then have any control over like how to make it a Saw film, or funny for that matter.
It would be like another Halloween film, but they're like, we changed the mask, and we changed his weapon to a strimmer because we got a bit bored, and everyone would go, "Oh, great, reinvention!" No, do what everyone is scared of: the horrible, creepy puppet, Billy, the right puppet, and good traps.
And I didn't even mind the idea that, okay, it's a new story, it's a new killer, it's a new mystery. That's all fine, like, great. But yeah, just do it right. I don't know. I think ultimately for me, the biggest downfall is its script. It's just such a bad script.
It's a bad
dialogue.
script.
The dialogue is unbearable, isn't it? Like from beginning to end, I think that's the problem.
And it's so wordy as well. It's not like they're just one-off bad lines of a grizzled cop being a grizzled cop. It's like the first half an hour is just chat, just boring.
It's just
chat.
men shouting exposition at one another.
By algorithm. by algorithm. Like, we're going to catch this son of a bitch that did this. Like, oh, really? Okay, yeah, right.
Oh, okay. Let's wrap it up there. Oh, no, before we finish, I've got to ask. I may be putting you both on the spot here, but let's do our final rankings. Now, all three of us have watched all 8 films in the last couple of months. Louise, give us your rankings first.
Which way would you like me to start? Best to worst or worst to best?
What should we start with? Let's start with worst to best, shall we?
Spiral.
Oh, very literally the bottom. Yeah.
Shit.
Jigsaw. 7. 4. Now, I thought I'd put this higher on my list, but I haven't. 6. 2. 3. 5. 1.
Interesting. So your top 3 are Saw 3, Saw 5, then Saw 1.
And funny enough, since I wrote this list a while back, I have actually upgraded my memories of 6 and put it in number 2, but I haven't done that, so I'm going to have to stick with my current one. But I like 1, 5, 3 was stupid, and I've upgraded 2 slightly. But yes.
Yeah, I like it. That's good. Rob, give us yours.
Okay, worst to best. Spiral. Sorry, Spiral. 7, because that was a travesty. 4, Jigsaw. 5, 3, 2, 6, 1.
3, 2, 6, 1.
So
nice.
1, original and best. Like, even on rewatch, that first film just got me so pumped. Like,
yeah. Yeah. All right, nice. We're all kind of similar. I've gone Spiral, bottom. Then 3, then Saw 7, then Saw 4. Then right in the middle, I've got 2 and 3. So 2, then 3, then Jigsaw. I put Jigsaw quite high, but I can't deny that I actually had a hell of a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I was surprised how much you liked that. But
yeah,
fair.
I really did have fun. I mean, it was so stupid. So stupid, but I kind of liked its look and its vibe, and it was different to the others. And then top 3, Saw 6, then Saw 5, and then Saw 1. So 6, 5, and 1, my top 3.
So what?
Basically.
Spiral last?
I was torn between 7 and Spiral, because 7 is like offensively terrible. But at least 7 has a lot of really stupid gore and action that I kind of probably was less bored in Saw 3D, watching like white supremacists get their faces ripped off and stuff. At least was slightly more stupid entertainment than Spiral.
And conceptually,
yeah.
7 was great. The idea of a Jigsaw, that was Jigsaw guy lying.
Survivor.
The guy lying. The survivor. That to me is a great concept, even though the execution was terrible. The idea that you wouldn't think that a psychopathic, moralistic killer would come looking for you for lying is hilarious.
Yeah. And, bringing Dr. Gordon back in and stuff. So it had a few moments of like fun interest in that, which Spiral didn't have, sadly. No. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing with Spiral is it's trying to appeal to people who've never seen a Saw film, which is fine, but obviously it needs to be good for people to like it. But then it also doesn't appeal to Saw fans because there's just not enough Saw in it, is there?
No.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Guys, thank you so much. Louise, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us where people can find more of your stuff, and also remind us again where they can find your Saw article, because, I mean, people should check that out.
Yeah, that's on, should be, by the time this comes out, should be on gamesradar.com.
Nice.
Along with all of my upcoming horror movies, which I've been regularly updating every month, if in case you're confused where all the movies live. I've been desperately scouring release dates, so do check that out as well. But you can find me on Twitter at shiny_demon. And thank you so much for letting me revisit Saw with you guys. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been so good. Thank you for joining us. And Rob, remind us where we can find you and your new podcast.
Oh, yes, thank you. As always, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at RobWatts88. And I've just dropped a new, very small series about Icelandic cinema. It's called Kvikmyndapod, which basically means cinema pod. And me and my friend Ellie, we go through some of the best films of Icelandic cinema and try and get other people to see them. And that should be available wherever you get your podcasts.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And there we go. That's it for this week's episode on the main feed. But a quick reminder, if you are a Patreon subscriber, or if you want to sign up to Patreon, you can hear the extended version of our discussion in which me, Louise and Rob discuss Spiral in spoilerific detail. And we talk about the ending, the final act, and some specific moments. So if you want to check that out, head on over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. If you sign up at a $10 level, you will get access to our entire Saw mini-series, our retrospective, and you'll get the extended Spiral conversation. You'll also get access to a whole bunch of other bonus episodes and mini-seasons, including a mini-season on Alfred Hitchcock, a mini-season on extreme cinema, and a mini-season on Twin Peaks. But you could also sign up at a $5 level. That won't get you access to the mini-seasons, but you will get at least 2 bonus episodes per month, and you'll get a whole back catalogue of over 100 bonus episodes. So sign up now. Patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. A huge thank you one more time to this week's guests, Rob Watts and Louise Blain. Sadly, we didn't love Spiral, but I would love to hear what you guys thought. Is anyone going to stick up for the movie? Does anyone think we were completely wrong and really harsh? I would love to hear some other opinions. Please do get in touch. evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can also find us on all the socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, and there's also a discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group. You can find that on Facebook, and there you can join up and discuss Spiral and anything else horror related with fellow listeners. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn, Spotify, and all the others. You can find all previous episodes and seasons of this podcast on our website, evolutionofhorror.com. If you get a spare minute, we would really appreciate a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, which really helps us get boosted in algorithms and helps us get discovered by new listeners. Well, thank you so much once again for listening, and don't forget, keep an eye out on your feed because we will be launching our brand new series on cosmic and alien horror very, very soon. Join us again soon for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.